Few places in the known world are as inimical to civilization as the Darklands. Between the World's Edge Mountains in the west and the Mountains of Morn in the east, the skies grow dim and cheerless, while the ground hardens into an endless expanse of cracked, lifeless earth. The lands grow ravaged and charred, split apart by rivers of molten tar, or pierced by towering volcanoes, whose fiery peaks stain the air and earth. The atmosphere is thick with the acrid scent of sulfur, or drifts of ash with slowly glowing embers. Only the greenskins, it is said, and the other foul races can thrive within the Darklands, with the ancient ruins of cities and fortresses, the last monuments of more noble races that tried and failed to do the same. Yet even here, in this bleak and inhospitable place, evidence of a higher civilization might be found. There are roads, enormous highways of plated bronze, brass, and gold that stretch tirelessly for endless leagues across the Darklands. They span the deepest gulfs of shattered rock and burning magma, and pierce the densest forests of ominous black thorns. Ages of use have clearly marked their surface, but the majesty of their design and the resilience with which they endure bear testament to a mastery of craftsmanship well beyond that of the brutish orcs, or men and elves. It would be a terrible mistake, however, to see these roads as a relief from the treacherousness of the Darklands. The winding caravans of Cathay will veer wide to avoid them, while the warbands of orcs and ogres that plague this blighted region have been known to hesitate when these highways appear in their path. To understand why, one need only to place a hand upon their surface. Vibrations, it is known, have difficulty passing through the substance from which these roads are made, but even so, tremors can be felt, rhythmic pulses of great machines and marching armies whose distance cannot conceal their power. For in the Darklands, all roads lead to Zar-Nagrand, fortress of the Dawi Zar, realm of the Chaos Dwarves. It is common across the famously unyielding dwarf race to admonish the resolve and loyalty of others. They take pride in their own admittedly formidable resilience, and portray themselves as impervious to the taint of chaos that has so often been the doom of other societies. Deep within the stoic facade of the Dawi, however, lies a hidden truth, and their greatest shame, that among their own kind are those that succumb to the alluring whispers of corruption. In an era now ancient and forgotten by nearly all outside their kind, the dwarves were once a young, dynamic race, quickly spreading across the World's Edge Mountains and seeking new territories beyond. Their migrations took them into the northernmost reaches of the Darklands, which they named Zorn-Azkul, the Great Skull Land. Bleak and hostile even then, most of the Dawi considered the ground here to be accursed, and moved on to the more familiar mountains in Norska, or pressed onwards into the east and south. A few, however, were willing to remain. Though clearly a blighted place, the great volcanoes and bubbling pits that mark these lands brought to the surface enormous veins of minerals and gems. Gold and silver, iron and copper, diamonds, rubies, sapphires, amethysts, jade, and even gromil, all were found here in greater abundance than in many of the greatest and deepest dwarf holds. And while elsewhere such an abundance of wealth might need to be slowly carved out of stubborn mountains, or excavated by intricate mines, in Zorn-Azkul, entire fields of precious gems lay strewn amongst the ash and dust, just waiting to be plucked from the earth, as readily as any mushroom. The port city of Uzkulak became a new seat of power for these eastern settlers, and the riches of the Darklands became the lifeblood of the new, burgeoning dwarf empire. Yet this era of peace ended swiftly, and the great catastrophe severed these dwarfs from their kin. Tides of magical energy swept across the world, the impossible works of the Old Ones were destroyed, and in place of their grand design came the terrible powers of chaos. None can say with certainty what terrible acts of slaughter and malice took place within the Dark Lands. But it is clear that the greater armies of the Dawi were kept in the defense of only their most noble holds. The settlers of the East were left to struggle alone in the fading light. All around them, armies of nameless horrors erupted into reality, and the skies were fully darkened by the endless eruption of volcanoes in a land that was slowly tearing itself apart. Isolated and besieged by tides of demons, and betrayed by the very ground beneath their feet, the surviving dwarves of Uskulak and those of the other great mines and strongholds scattered across Zorn Osku turned on one another. Where some held steadfast in their reverence for Grongni, Velaya, Grimnir, and the other ancestor gods of the Dawi, many more felt abandoned, and in their desperation turned to darker powers. All that can be said with certainty is that a terrible bargain was struck during this era, one that was certainly paid for in the blood of those dwarves who refused to cast aside the honor of their kind. When the tide of magic and the chaos it had unleashed slowly began to recede from the world, a new empire had been carved into the Dark Lands. The dwarves of Zorn Osku had been transformed, imbued with sorcerous powers that had once been antithetical to their very nature. This was the work of their new god, it was claimed, a strange being of smoke and shadow they named Hushut. They had severed their most ancient beliefs from their own souls, and would forever be marked as the Dawi Zar, or Fire Dwarves in the common tongue. Physically, Chaos Dwarves might be mistaken at a distance for their uncorrupted kin. Though they have lived now for millennia in a land beset by powerful tides of magic, their natural resilience and the supposed protection of Hashut have spared them from the worst effects of chaos mutation. Even so, they have almost universally developed curved tusks, and some occasionally develop cloven hoofs and horns. A few in ancient times even underwent a far more dramatic transformation, and their modern offspring are no longer considered to be any form of Dawi Zar at all. It is within their minds that the corruption largely absent from their bodies is most acute. Dwarves can be obstinate, vindictive, suspicious, vengeful, arrogant, and inflexible. But in the Dawi Zar, however, these qualities have flourished without restraint. They are grim and cold-hearted creatures, devoid of any display of joy or act of mercy. They have been consumed fully by greed, and are now driven by an insatiable thirst to enslave and dominate the world around them. It is a form of corruption that slowly grows across their race. Their long lives provide fuel for the malevolent intent and monstrous patience that intensifies within their souls. Only in their unbreakable loyalty to one another, their grudges and kinship, can the qualities of their ancestors still find purchase in their hearts. But even these have been touched by the hand of chaos and poisoned by hatred. It is understood that the malign influence of chaos affects each race differently and might be expressed in a multitude of ways. In men, it can lead to a howling anarchy. In elves, an unrestrained desire for pain and pleasure. Beastmen exhibit only mindless savageness, while lesser creatures display a desperate, vicious aggression. In the Dawi Zar, however, the influence of chaos has taken an altogether unfamiliar form. In every aspect, their civilization embraces a meticulous structure where each facet of life and death is strictly controlled. The pursuit of efficiency and order has eclipsed every other value, with individual expression seen as nothing more than weakness to be purged. The empire of the Dawi Zar exists as a rigid oligarchy theocracy. At its apex lies the demonsmiths, strange and tortured creatures who are said to be amongst the first of their kind to be imbued with the gifts of Hashut. Though great sorcerers and engineers, their power derives not solely from the terrible acts of magic or technology they might unleash, but rather from their role as the high priests of Hashut. There is not a single aspect of their society that does not in some way venerate their patron god, and the priesthood of the Dwarfs are naturally acknowledged as the mortal lords and masters of their people. These sorcerer prophets rule from the capital of Mingol, Zarnagrund, the Tower of Fire and Desolation. The entire city reflects the obsessive need for hierarchy and order within the Chaos Dwarves, constructed in the manner of an immense ziggurat. At its pinnacle lies the Temple of Hushut, where the highest conclave of demonsmiths assemble to guide the progress of their empire and grow closer to their god. Seniority and expertise are as prized within Zarnagrund as they are in distant Karaz-Akarak, but there is no room for weakness in the halls of the Dwarfs, and even a respected elder might be cast from the tower should their strength or determination come into question. Many of the greatest demonsmiths maintain their own powerful holdings, both within Zarnagrund and outside its borders. Their numbers are limited, however, and most positions of authority across the Empire are held by lesser sorcerers, respected engineers, or master warriors. All those that manage the day-to-day governance of their race are pledged in some manner to the conclave of Mingol Zarnagrund, but that relationship can vary from strict vassalage to a nominal loyalty that serves as a convenient facade rather than a binding commitment. Some lords, operating farther from the capital, might outwardly acknowledge the authority of the conclave, but whether they work to support it or undermine it depends on their own fickle desires for personal gain and their prevailing self-interest. Despite the potential for vicious power struggles at the highest levels, the Dwarfs are naturally inclined towards structure and order, and will rarely make any moves against their rivals that might threaten the greater cohesion of their race. When such political maneuvers do occur, it is often when the chance of failure is negligible. The repercussions from such actions can be bloody, but are usually brief. The remainder of Dwarfs society in some ways reflects that of their western kin. Beneath the conclave and their appointed lords are various clans, guilds, and cults whose influence creates a unique blend of formal and informal power structures or lesser hierarchies. Warrior cults dominate the capital and most outlying settlements, however, and it is said that every Chaos Dwarf, regardless of profession or station, is also a capable warrior whose prowess has been tested at one time or another on the battlefield. The Infernal Guard is one such cult. Their members have suffered some stain upon their honor, or failed in some manner, and now seek to atone for their transgression by serving as the elite warriors and guardians of their society. There are perhaps no warriors in the known world who are so relentlessly drilled, or so unyielding in their devotion. Though the nature of their penance might evoke comparison with the Slayer cults of Karak Kadrin or elsewhere, the Infernal Guard has its own peculiarities, special mercies ascribed to the whims of their god's capricious temperament. Members of the cult have their faces encased within red-hot helms of iron and bronze, erasing both their names and lines of kinship. They work to redeem themselves in anonymity, and should some great act catch the attention of the high priests, these masks might be cut away. Beneath is revealed the charred and ravaged flesh of the redeemed, their name and honor restored. The remainder of the Chaos Dwarf civilization is made up by the endless ranks of slaves, whose short lives are sacrificed to the fires of industry and war. Though their numbers have slowly increased across the millennia, the Dwarfs produce few offspring, and the insatiable demands of Zarnagrund has created an equally pressing need for cheap labor. These slaves, drawn and traded from conquered lands and subjugated peoples, vastly outnumber the Chaos Dwarves themselves, but bear the consequences of their unrelenting thirst for power, wealth, and dominance. Every fortress, army, and settlement within their territory will contain at least one overseer, and often far more. These are veteran warriors of the Dwarfs, tasked with the command of slave armies, both in labor and war. The limitless greenskin populations of the Darklands provide the biggest source of labor for the Dwarfs, and can be found in immense numbers both within the capital and every outlying forge, settlement, or mine of any note. Yet, However full the pens and cages might be within the slave districts of the Empire, the demand is always greater. Any slaver with sufficient stock can walk away from Tsar Nagrund, wealthy beyond measure, their safety guaranteed, so long as they promise to return with more workers to sell. Even the Druki, the most hated ancient foe of the dwarf race, might be welcomed, with mutual need overriding historic grudges. Yet only the most foolish Dark Elf would linger in the presence of the Dawi Tsar once their stocks were emptied. Consequently, every creature from every land, so long as they are fit to work or fit to die, might be found toiling in the mines or sacrificed in the temples. Curiously, only hobgoblins have displayed the unique blend of cowardice and ambition needed to rise above the enslaved masses and achieve some level of power for themselves. They are often appointed as supervisors and foremen, whipping those in their charge with greater enthusiasm than even the most devout Dawi Tsar overseer. In return, the hobgoblins are mostly left to their own devices, and they enjoy in the service of the Chaos Dwarves a far greater freedom than they would ever experience if similarly enslaved by their larger cousins. Though the use of such creatures in their industries is a hateful thing, even to the Dawi Tsar, this is rationalized by regarding their slaves of any origin merely as different types of tools. Through this, even the greenskin race might be utilized, and even respected to some minor degree, as a method of excavation or some other physical labor, a cheap but sustainable system that requires little food or water, can endure even the harshest conditions, and replenishes its own numbers. Other, stranger things exist within the Empire, and not always as cheap labor. Bull centaurs were apparently once Chaos Dwarves themselves, but twisted into a likeness of their god after the pact with Hashad was first made. They are arrogant and cruel, and serve as temple guards and shock cavalry. Though few in number, every generation sees at least a few more born, and they are immediately turned over to the greatest sorcerers, who infuse them with frameworks of metal and the tainted flesh of demons. The Kadai are even more exotic, fire given life through dark magic, while the Lamassu and Great Taurus are thought to be a strange intermingling of the power of Hashut with the corrupted nature of the Darklands itself. More than any other element, the twin principles of industry and worship bind together the empire of the Dawi Tsar. Every action, every choice, every principle upheld or broken, all is done to the sustainment of the greater effort. Like their distant cousins, the Chaos Dwarves are first and foremost master craftsmen, and it is perhaps the destiny of their race to produce the endless streams of armor, weapons, ammunition, and machines so badly desired by all the followers of Chaos. The Dawi Tsar have embraced the perils of innovation that their ancestors once abhorred, weaving dark sorcery and even demons into their creations. In place of the traditional workshops and artisanal forges of their kind, they have taken the principles of industry and expanded upon them exponentially, creating enormous fortress factories that can surpass the work of a master human blacksmith in but an instant. Inside is a dizzying labyrinth of blast furnaces and rolling mills, casting machines and cooling towers, quenching tanks and control rooms, all surrounded by endless conveyor systems and scrapyards. It is a landscape of industry, bathed in the eerie glow of perpetual fires where the agonized wails of tormented creatures are lost beneath the rhythmic pounding of machinery, ingenious in their design, grotesque in their function. To help quench the endless need for slaves, the output of these factories is sold to the highest bidder, and Chaos warbands from Norska to Nagarond come to possess some of the most formidable weapons, armor, and dark devices in the known world. Far greater creations, cannons, and siege engines might be traded to powerful Chaos Lords, and it is said that even the Ever-Chosen owes much of their might to the arsenal of destruction that the Dawi Tsar produce. Through this trade, the Chaos Dwarves enrich themselves as essential allies to the Slaves of Darkness, and ensure weapons forged for the glory of Hashad sow destruction and blood across the world. It is the worship of Hashad that forms the second pillar of the civilization, though few outside the Tower of Zarnagrund know the truth behind this god of darkness. Some believe it to be one of the minor chaos gods without a part in the great game. Others speculate it might be some kind of archdemon or a stranger entity altogether, some unknown evil unleashed upon the ancient world. Whatever the case, Hashad is often portrayed as a great blazing bull, wreathed in smoke, ash, and shadow, the patron of despots, the greedy, and the hate-filled. Through Hashad, an entire race has been transformed, and while the powers gifted to the Dawizar are almost unfathomable, they come at a terrible price. Through wicked sorcery, monsters of metal and flame can be crafted and then imbued with a dark intelligence. Ingenious insights of engineering and science can be elevated to the stuff of miracles, and even new forms of life might be crafted from the old. But the use of magic is fatal to a dwarf, and all those who practice the arts of sorcery are cursed to a grim and desolate fate. Known as the Curse of Stone, the body of a Dawizar sorcerer will slowly petrify until it is left at the gates of their capital, indistinguishable from any other statue. For most in the known world, the Chaos Dwarves are a distant concern, if their existence is even acknowledged at all. The Dawi of the World's Edge Mountains are loath to speak of their distant kin, and their silence has allowed the Dawizar to work with near impunity. Only those who venture into the Darklands know the true scale of their ambition, and the few who survive to speak of such things are rarely believed. But for every second of every day and every night, the relentless grind of industry continues. Forests are consumed, lakes run dry, rivers redirected, and mountains carved down to gravel. With every passing year, their empire expands, sometimes by inches, and sometimes by leagues. They will not stop until the world is a place of smoky darkness, where hope and cheer have been ground to nothingness beneath the weight of slavery. Their roads will encircle the earth, upon which an endless tide of sorrow marches to Zarnagrund. Reduced to fuel and labor within the infinite fires of industry.
The Templin Institute investigates the nations, factions, and organizations of alternate worlds. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to join the Templin Institute, consider pledging to our Patreon page. Along with increased security access, you'll be able to vote in polls to determine future topics, get custom wallpaper every week, and receive some other exclusive rewards.